Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change, environmental breakdown, ecosystem collapse, biosphere collapse, things of that nature. I wanted to get into two main articles tonight, and I wanted to just say, thank you all who keep on riding with me on this channel. We are small, but we are mighty. I appreciate all of your comments and your feedback. Don't know if I'm losing people talking about politics or not, but it's interesting to me, the political aspect of what's going on in the world. And I think that that's a key part to whether or not we are going to ever have a chance of maybe turning the ship around. For most that watch this channel, of course, you already know, or you already think, or maybe some of you strongly believe the ship has already sailed and there's no turning it around. I say, I don't know. We don't know. We don't know anything for certain, and I really don't. As much as I believe in the numbers and science, and I totally, there are a lot of physical processes that are unavoidable in this plane, on this sphere. We don't know. We don't know exactly how the Earth is going to respond to what we're doing to it. We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know exactly how things are going to progress. There are lots of people that have very good ideas about this and very good theories about this. And, for the most part, I believe those theories are fairly correct and fairly true. But, it ain't over till it's over. So, until the day until the day comes when I feel like pretty much everything is lost and there's nothing more for me to say about this, probably when there's no power for me to say anything about this, I'm going to continue talking about it because I believe that it's important, and it's important to, it's important to bear witness to what's going on. It's important to provide an outlet for people to talk about what's going on. This is an outlet for me to talk about what's going on. And I like to play games, of what if. As long as I have, full certainty of what reality is, there's nothing wrong with playing games of what if. What if we were to turn this around? What if we were to suddenly enter some kind of, mass enlightenment, or at least a level of consciousness that would allow us as a species to actually deal with what we are doing to the planet. And I feel on some levels that we are, because of our technological progress, because of our, I think on some level, even spiritual progress, that we are becoming more awake, more aware, more conscious, excuse me. And I'm going to say this as strange. This is going to sound strange as hell, but I believe that Trump is Trump is a sign of extreme growing pains in our world. In the last election, we had basically two populist candidates, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, who were positioning themselves as outside the mainstream, who were talking about, the reality of politics as opposed to the game of politics. And, you know, whatever it is you want to believe about either of those candidates, that I think was an important sign in the road forward. I think that there's no room for any corporate beholden politicians to really get into the next presidential race. I don't see it unless people are willing to turn off what, you know, to unknow what they already know. There's too much information. There are too many people becoming aware. There are too many people becoming woke, if you will, and you know, YouTube is a place for ideas, a place to exchange ideas that other people, you know, that you can't talk about in other places. So I'm, you know, glad to have this channel. I'm glad to have this platform. I'm glad to have these viewers. I'm glad to have this forum. I'm glad to have found the information that I found about things that are quite important to me and quite interesting to me in this area, and, you know, other areas of the internet as well. But as long as we have the freedom to talk about these ideas, as long as we have these platforms that allow us to talk about these ideas, we can continue to slowly move the ball, you know, a little bit farther down the field, the ball of consciousness, and the ball of, you know, the ideas that we are quickly shedding as a species are going to have to be replaced with, you know, new things, new institutions, new people. I strongly believe that. So I think Trump is a sign of, you know, whatever. There's people in the Trump world that talk about the Great Awakening or whatever, and for the most part, there is. I don't know that it necessarily has anything to, you know, distinctly to do with him or even conservatives on a lot of levels, but I think that there is an awakening happening. There is something going on. And I think it's very important to keep on spreading information, talking about things that other people won't talk about, and continuing to have conversations, real deep conversations with people, and hopefully slowly flip the switch on human history. You never know. All right. I'm going to read some things. Two articles I want to read as something from Darja Mail just came out in Truth Out Today. And I'm going to read something also came out today in Arctic News, Sam Carana. A quick note to climate deniers that come to this channel. Just please, before you spout some dipshit shit on the comments, can you just watch? Just take in the information. If you don't like what you hear, there's the door. You can just go. You don't have to leave a comment because nobody cares what you have to say here. I'm just telling you that. I don't care. Nobody, you're not going to change anybody's mind, and just, you know, blurting some unintelligent stuff on the comment board is not, it's not helping you or anybody else. So please, you know, at least resist the urge to plug negativity into this channel. But you are totally welcome to stay and listen to what I have to say, and listen to what other people have to say in the comment sections. There's lots of good stuff. I encourage you to do this. From Truth Out, Darja Mail, April 2nd. Thanks to climate disruption, Earth is already losing critical biosphere components. 2 weeks ago, I gave a keynote presentation about anthropogenic climate disruption at a large sustainability conference in Chico, California. During the question and answer session following my talk, a student asked me what I thought the world would look like by 2050. His question stopped me in my tracks. I had to pause and take a deep breath to prepare myself emotionally for what I had to tell him. Here's the gist of what I said. Based on years of research for my forthcoming book, The End of Ice, along with my work compiling these monthly climate disruption dispatches for 4 years now, I know that by 2050, we will be inhabiting a dramatically different planet. I believe we will already have tens, if not hundreds, of millions of climate refugees from sea level rise and conflicts born of lack of food and water. What we currently call extreme weather events, massive floods, droughts, hurricanes, will have long since become the norm. In the US, growing food in the Midwest and Central Valley of California will be extremely difficult, not largely impossible. Due to shifting weather patterns of rainfall and drought, some swaths of the world, including the Gulf states in the Middle East and parts of the US Southwest, will be largely uninhabitable due to simply being too hot. Greenland and the Antarctic will both be experiencing dramatically advanced melting, and most of the glaciers in the contiguous 48 US states will have long since ceased to exist. And given that we are officially already amidst the sixth mass extinction event of the planet, which humans triggered, the biological annihilation that comes with this is happening apace. This portrait might seem far-fetched to some, but to understand this is our future, all we need to do is look at what is already happening around the planet. In early March, Arctic sea ice hit record lows for that time of year, along with stunningly warm temperatures for the region, which scientists called crazy, crazy stuff. Researchers there are continuing to scratch their heads about the dramatic ACD-fueled changes besetting the Arctic. The biosphere is convulsing. Unchecked ACD, which appears likely to continue since governments, particularly that of the United States, are not preparing to undertake the kinds of drastic mitigation measures that might have impact, will dramatically degrade global fish catch over the coming centuries and may well reduce total oceanic plant life for a millennium, according to a recent study. The study also noted that these changes cannot be reversed until the climate cools. The amount of warming humans have already caused on Earth is, according to a recent study, likely already enough to melt more than 1/3 of all the world's glaciers outside of Antarctica and Greenland, regardless of ongoing efforts to reduce the fossil fuel emissions. The study analyzed the lag between the global temperature increases and the retreat of glaciers and found a relatively slow response of glaciers to planetary warming. Researchers noted that it will take until 2100 at least to see any benefits from serious mitigation efforts over the next decades, assuming those efforts actually happen. One of the scientists involved in the study told Carbon Brief that this glacier loss is already baked into the system and has been overlooked, which essentially means we really are on a course to obliterate many of these mountain landscapes. Meanwhile, a recently published World Wildlife Fund report has predicted catastrophic losses in the world's forests. As much as 60% of plants and half of all the animals are predicted to disappear by 2100. If temperatures rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, the scientific consensus states that 1.5 C rise is a given. In fact, some prominent scientists believe an increase of 3.2 C by 2100 is most likely, given current national commitments. If emissions remain unchecked, which is the current actual trajectory, a 4.5 C rise is the forecast. It is worth noting that oil giants BP and Shell are planning on 5 C of planetary warming by 2050. Taking all this information in is necessary if we are to see the world clearly and live our lives accordingly. I'm going to repeat that. Taking all this information in is necessary if we are to see the world clearly and live our lives accordingly. Earth Roundup. The World Bank recently warned that if dramatic intervention doesn't occur on the ACD front, 140 million people across 3 regions, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America of the Earth will become refugees between now and 2050. An example of one of the factors driving such mass movement of people can be found in California, where a recent report citing nearly 90 different studies found that warming temperatures could alter where key crops grow across the state. Bearing in mind that California produces roughly 2/3 of all the produce in the US, the report notes that ACD could decrease the yield of some of the crops grown in California by as much as 40% by 2050. In Vermont, warming temperatures, particularly during the winter, are causing extreme weather events and unpredictable rainfall, which experts recently warned was making forests across the state particularly vulnerable to ACD. Boreal forests and moose populations will be the hardest hit, warned the study. The world's northernmost regions have not escaped extreme weather. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, known as the Doomsday Vault, was created to protect the world's seeds in the event of cataclysmic ACD impacts or nuclear war, whichever comes first. Disturbingly, it is now in need of an upgrade thanks to ACD. Norway, which built and maintains the vault, is having to invest $13 million to upgrade the vault to make room for more seeds and make it more resilient. Given a recent flooding event there, last year, flooding at the entrance of the vault prompted the Norwegian government to begin looking into the upgrade, which is now going to move forward. Bad news also abounds for Earth's animal species. A recently published study in the journal Nature Climate Change showed that Antarctica's king penguins could be extinct by 2100, due primarily to ACD impacts and overfishing. In Florida, research revealed recently that nearly all the sea turtles being born there are female due to higher temperatures. Obviously, if this trend continues, which it almost assuredly will, there will be no more sea turtles in Florida. Meanwhile, over in Europe, the authors of a recent report out of France's National Museum of Natural History and the National Center for Scientific Research showed a catastrophic decline in France's bird populations. The trend signals the possibility of Europe's farmland turning into desert, a situation that would ultimately threaten all human beings. The scientists warned of a wider crisis of biodiversity, or lack thereof, across the continent, with ACD impacts and pesticides to blame. This comes on the heels of concerning news of 76% decline in the abundance of flying insects in Germany over the last 27 years. I just have to quickly interject. I went for a hike today with my kids, and there were no bugs. We were in like a natural area, like a wooded area, hiking around, and it's spring here now, and everything's blooming, plants are blooming, et cetera, but there weren't any bugs. There were no flying animals anywhere, and so it was I don't know, it's quite strange. I was like, is this odd? And this is definitely odd. The water roundup, as is often the case in the spring, the watery realms of the planet are where the ACD impacts are most evident. Widespread ongoing winter drought across U.S. from Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri to the Dakotas, Texas, and California have many farmers worried about this year being a repeat of 2012, the worst drought in the U.S. since the Dust Bowl. At present, the winter drought is worse than it was in 2012. Wow. Okay. The problem, I had no idea. The problem extends beyond those states. In Colorado, at the time of this writing, I do know that there's very, very little snowfall. Snow would need to fall at 200% of the state's average through the end of April for its snowpack to catch up to normal. Water managers there are keeping a leery eye on reservoirs as summer looms on the horizon. Colorado is not an anomaly. Snowpack across the western U.S. has been dramatically lower than it was a century ago. A recent study showed that average snowpack in the West has dropped by nearly 1/3 since 1915. That is equivalent to the decrease we'd see from permanently draining Nevada's Lake Mead, the single largest man-made reservoir in the U.S. Changing weather patterns and warmer year-round temperatures have scientists in Western Canada, a place you wouldn't think needs to worry about water issues, worried about running out of water in the future. For example, in 2017, there was a record amount of snowfall in one region, but even all that snow was still not enough to prevent a drought on the southern part of the prairies below it. The changing climate there also means the snowpack is melting faster and earlier than usual, which means that water is moving through river basins faster and leaving them dry before the end of summer. On the other side of the world, New Zealand is experiencing similar concerns. Its Alps have become incredibly barren, as a recent aerial survey shows how the loss of snow there is being called extreme. A recently released UN report on the state of the world's water warned that more than 5 billion people could suffer water shortages by 2050 due largely to ACD and increasing demand. Furthermore, extreme weather events like the major floods and extreme rainfall events have surged more than 50% this decade alone, and are now happening 4 times more often than they were just in just 1980, according to a recent paper. Meanwhile, seas continue to rise. A recent NOAA report warned that sea level rise will rapidly worsen flooding that is already happening in coastal communities around the U.S. A report warned that some cities will see flooding on a daily basis by 2021. According to this, another recent study showed that lakes on the Greenland ice sheet are now forming further inland, meaning they are now potentially threatening to speed up ice flow once they drain to the glacial floor. In Antarctica, the news is no better. The absence of sea ice near that continent over the past 6 weeks, as of the time of this writing, has deeply concerned scientists conducting research there. In addition to paying attention to large continental changes, it's important to take note of the ACD-driven shifts on the level of microorganisms. A recent report showed that excessive rates of carbon dioxide affect the health of critical microorganisms in the oceans, which could potentially undermine the base of vital marine food chains. This is happening largely due to ocean acidification, a result of ACD. Fire section. Given the low snowpack levels across much of the western U.S., this summer is already expected to be another above-average wildfire season for much of that part of the country. Since snowpack functions as a water source through much of the summer, when warmer temperatures cause it to melt off faster than normal, drier conditions ensue. Meanwhile, in Australia, more than 70 homes and buildings have been destroyed in a fast-moving brush fire in New South Wales, while separate fires destroyed 18 properties in Victoria. Local authorities there described the fires as the worst of Australia's summer season thus far. As is always the case with extreme weather events, none of these fires can be solely attributed to ACD. However, climate disruptions impacts are a key contributing factor to how often they occur, as well as to their intensity. Air roundup. In Australia, a new study reveals that the country's record-setting 2012 heat wave was responsible for the destruction of roughly 1,000 square kilometers of seagrass meadows, which had acted as a repository for CO2. When the meadows were destroyed, the disaster released as much as 9 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, nearby New Zealand experienced its hottest summer on record last year. It definitely broke with normal temperatures, clocking in at a shocking 2.1 C above the past 35-year average temperature. Back in the US, USGS data has revealed how spring has arrived much earlier than normal for much of the country, a clear indicator of how ACD is continuing to shift overall climate patterns. In the Arctic, in fact, spring is beginning an average of 16 days earlier than it did just 1 decade ago. Study in the journal Scientific Reports noted an increase in the number of warm temperature records in the spring, along with changes to the timing of bird migrations, flowers blooming, and other seasonal indicators. What makes this even more disconcerting is the fact that scientists have found a direct and strong link between warmer Arctic temperatures and abnormally high snowfall amounts and frigid temperatures further south of that region. So, for example, the severe weather that has been impacting the northeastern U.S. this spring is linked directly to the ACD-related warm wave happening across the Arctic region. Lastly in this section, but perhaps most importantly, thawing Arctic permafrost is now likely to release more methane than previously expected. Methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, as it is 100 times stronger over a 10-year timescale. The new study found that waterlogged wetland soils will produce considerably more methane than previously predicted. Denial and reality. There was never a dull moment in the Trump administration's land of ACD denial. A recent and excellent article published at The Conversation outlined the 4 primary methods used by this administration to deny or hide the reality of ACD. These methods are, according to the article, making documents more difficult to find on government websites, burying web pages, altering language, and silencing the science. Truthout's Mike Ludwig also detailed how ACD, as a threat to the U.S., has literally gone missing under Trump. Meanwhile, the cabinet continues to be filled with ACD deniers. One of the more recent additions has been hardline climate denier Mike Pompeo as the Secretary of State, who, along with having longstanding close ties to the Koch brothers, in 2013 said during a C-SPAN interview, "There are scientists who think a lot of different things about climate change. There are some who think that we're warming. There are some who think the last 16 years have shown a pretty stable climate environment." A Trump administration official even went so far recently as to say that the USGS scientists went outside their wheelhouse by writing that ACD has dramatically reduced glaciers in Montana. One of the scientists who bore this attack responded, "This is what we do. It is our wheelhouse." Trump administration U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who thinks wearing thick-framed glasses makes him appear more intelligent, recently said that international efforts to reduce fossil fuel use were immoral. Meanwhile, EPA head Scott Pruitt, already an avid ACD denier, recently disputed evolution. On the reality front, thousands of scientists from the 22 Commonwealth countries have urged that stronger government action on ACD needs to be taken if there is hope to keep planetary warming lower than 2C. Underscoring that urgency, global demand for energy increased by 2.1% in 2017, more than twice the previous year's rate, according to the International Energy Agency. According to the same agency, energy-related CO2 emissions also increased by 1.4% during 2017, reaching a historic high of 32.5 gigatons. Despite glaring warning signs from around the planet, governments around the world are not taking dramatic measures to mitigate ACD impacts. In fact, the US government continues to refuse to even acknowledge those impacts exist. The world's most powerful forces are taking a business as usual approach as we are hurtled deeper into the sixth mass extinction event. Darjamel coming with the truth, as always. I do appreciate his writing. The thing that makes the year 2100 so ridiculous is that the rate of change that we are seeing in temperatures and ice melt and animal population decline, extinctions, et cetera, et cetera. The rate of change over the last 20 to 30 years, even in the last 10 years, the rate that is getting worse, the rate that the magnitude of this is rising. It doesn't make any 2100 doesn't make any sense, So at the rate that we are losing animals and we are losing ice and losing fish and losing coral and forests and any of the all of the old natural safeguards against climate change or rapid warming of the earth, or rapid planetary degradation, whatever you want to call it. The rate of change absolutely states that we are in big trouble in the next 20 years. When Shell says plan for 5C by 2050, the rate of change says that, we're going to hit 5C long before 2050. If we're not at 3C by 2025, I'd be really surprised. And that's only, 7 years away, 6 or 7 years away. I'd be very surprised, which means very bad things. Which means when Darjamel talks about looking at the reality so that we know how to, move forward in our lives, we also have to look at the reality of the dates, of the rate of change, and what that means to the timeline. Trying to describe what the world will look like in 2050 might better be described by, are we even going to be here to be able to describe it or experience it in 2050? Signs point to very, very unlikely. Which means that something needs to be done real quick. Real quick, like. And what can you do to change those things real quick, like? I don't know, many things. Stop using plastic, stop driving, stop flying, stop knee-jerk consumering. That's one of my something that's really like bothering me these days. And I live in this world, and I have to consume things too, and I have to wear clothes and like do things, and I kind of like resist all of it until I have to do it, and then it's just like, oh, I got whatever it might be, going to buy. But I generally try to buy things I absolutely need, and very I'm a very light consumer as consumerism goes, but just watching other people just constantly like acquire things that are completely utterly useless or are immediately going to go sit in a closet somewhere, it's just so like so frustrating. So one of the things that you can do is just watch how much you consume, what it is that you consume, why are you consuming it, do you just want it, or do you absolutely need it? Is it a bad thing to be wearing clothes from, whatever, 6 years ago? Or wearing your shoes, maybe 1 or 2 pairs of shoes totally out before you buy some more. Little things like that. Or perhaps buying things secondhand, clothes, bikes, cars, everything, like. One of the greatest things you can do is to buy something that's already in the world instead of buying something that, obviously if it's created and you're buying it new, it's already in the world. But I think repurposing is, it is recycling. So I've gone on really long on this video already, and I've just read this one article. I think what I'm going to do is stop this and come back and read the Arctic News Sam Perena article and see how far we get with that on another video. See you on the flip.